Uh, our next speaker will be Dr. John Johnson from SDSU's Department of Special Education. He'll be speaking on education and human values and standards of ethics and humanity in teacher education and preparation.
Okay, well, this is a first, so, and you guys are tough, so I'm going to proceed through this, but I also want to make the caveat that I kind of got into this business because I work with a extremely vulnerable population. Teachers, I prepare teachers and have actually a large federal grant that is engaged in teacher preparation of special education teachers who work with kids with pretty significant disabilities as well as kids who are at risk. I've been in the field since 1980, and I have to tell you that as I've gone through and reflected on my career, I've gotten to a point where I've become less and less enchanted with where we are in both in education in general as well as in my own discipline. And it's allowed me the opportunity to raise a lot of questions. I work with populations that are the least empowered, and we actually use language like management and intervention, behavioral control. We bow down to things like the altar of evidence-based practice. Excuse me for being a little edgy here. We have detached, systematically detached, in my opinion, teachers from kids to the point where the prior Jennifer and Michael's presentation are very were salient to the point where I was seeing how, if you will, teaching pedagogy is replacing the individual teacher in the classroom. We are seeing practice become so intrusive that assessment becomes a validation of whether or not a teacher is doing their job and continues to perform their job. We're seeing a fear and failure to address fundamental issues. If you pick up a book on teaching methodology, at least in my own discipline, and look for the single word love, you won't find it. You would be really hard-pressed to find the word love in a single book of the pedagogy of teaching kids with disabilities. I got into this field because I love kids. Now, I don't know, maybe I should sit down and define love or whatever the hell it is. I never have taken the opportunity. I knew what that meant to me, so I just did it. And I think a lot of teachers, that's why they get in the field. And we are getting to a point where we're enculturating teachers without giving them a sense of the history of education, the philosophy of education, and a very a serious lack of knowledge of where they are today and how we got to where we are today in the context of social justice in education. I know I'm sounding like I'm standing on a soapbox, but my apologies for that. To that extent, I believe we are often giving students mixed messages. And when I talk about students, I'm also talking about students with disabilities, students in general education. And as a concerned educator, I'm concerned about a lot of issues, including the violence done in schools and the violence in our local communities. So having said that, my bottom line is I'm here predominantly as a concerned educator. I don't claim to be a philosopher, although I don't see how you can be a teacher or an educator and not begin to examine basic philosophical assumptions and beliefs. And this isn't working, so let me... The keys are not working here.
Fix that, I think. It's the one thing I know how to do.
Okay. Okay, so what I'm doing right now is I'm engaged in a couple of current research interests, and these include better understanding the relationship between student values or dispositions, school violence, including bullying, and academic achievement. The relationship between teacher dispositions, and specifically values and ethics and instructional effectiveness. I'm also engaged in a study where I'm investigating the assumptions and values that underlie content standards, especially in California, and the relationship between teacher preparation and student efficacy, achievement, and moral development. And I'm using the word moral very loosely. In the context of this conversation, I want to be clear that I'm not talking about mandating a belief system here. I'm talking about a discovery of what, in the context of, again, this conversation of what, and in my role as a faculty member of another institute that's named the Institute for Satyasai Education, where the focus is on a belief where these values are innate, that they don't have to be taught, that they're inherent to the goodness of human nature. Now that may be idealistic, but I'm going to share with you some research that potentially supports that judgment. I'm going to present a study here where I looked at the content standards and core standards in California, and I asked, is there any expectation or standard for human values or ethical conduct in the content standards that we currently employ in California? Basically, Common Core state and content standards describe what students should know and be able to do in each subject in each grade. They're determined by the California State Board of Education, and they're monitored by the California Department of Education. I'm going to tell you that since 2010, 45 states have adopted the same standards, which are referred to as Common Core standards, basically to assure alignment across states that students are receiving similar instruction across similar content areas. Content areas define the knowledge, concepts, and skills that students should acquire at each grade level, but they do not prescribe levels of instruction. So these are the research questions. And basically, the bottom line was I'm looking at this from the standpoint of, do the standards address elements of moral and ethical characters, values, dispositions, and or personal integrity, that is, desirable student dispositions that would enhance what we would think would be an individual demonstrating ethical integrity. So the research questions, or the research indicates that there's an extensive focus on character education. All of you, I'm sure, have heard about character counts. And there is an increased focus on the need to assess teacher dispositions that's included in the National Council on Teacher Education Accreditation. But there's very little understanding or empirical evidence investigating the relationship about what may be considered students who demonstrate moral dispositions in their academic achievement. There's very little consensus about what to teach, much less how to teach it. And yet we have seen evidence that school violence and bullying is a national tragedy. Questions about school rules and it raises questions about school rules and promoting, if you will, a value that might be referred to as nonviolence, conflict resolution, whatever you want to call. We have got to get kids, we've got to stop kids from shooting other kids. We know that. It's not right. It's not good. I don't know if that's arguable at this point. So maybe I'm clueless here as an educator, but one of the things that I have, in terms of my, I apologize for revealing this, my Jesuit training growing up in parochial schools and high schools, suggests to me is that standards, by their very by their very nature, are a direct measure of what's valued in teaching and education. They are not empirically validated in advance. There is no a priori validation of any content or course standard. A group of people sit around the table and say, I think kids need to learn how to read. And they explain why. The validation gets into achievement. The instrumental validation goes into achievement. The instrumental validation goes into outcomes associated with being able to read. But the why they should be able to read is a value judgment. So what we want to teach kids to learn is often based on what we value, which is often frequently driven by, if you will, economic and political demands and factors, quite possibly at the expense of moral or ethical development. So the methodology in this particular study was I downloaded the Common Core standards and the Common Content standards and selected, because this study's in progress, that number 27, I selected 31 key terms that represent potential indicators of a thematic focus on character education and moral development. And I used common definitions that were basically online and used a very simple process, the search and find, to capture the frequency of occurrence of those words in the content standards. This is a basic list of those, and whether the right or wrong was a subjective judgment on my part. That's a limitation of the study. There is no consensus about these. I just happened to select them because it was my research project, so that's why I selected them. There is no literature, if you will, that suggests that these are traits or these are values or things that every student should learn. I just wanted to see what percentage of the content standards address any of these. This is the final, these are my preliminary results, and what I basically have discovered is that the majority of the references to any type of ethical conduct or moral conduct are contained within the health education content standards, K through 12 health education content standards in the state of California. There are a few more that are contained in world language content standards. Interestingly, no content standards in science or mathematics included any reference to any type of ethical or moral content. And yet, at least in my field, I am very familiar with the fact that when you submit a research project, it's subject to institutional review boards, particularly if it involves subjects that are human subjects. Every university has a protection of human subjects mandate, and the Department of Health and Human Services requires that. I'm also very familiar, and we all are probably in this room, of violations of those ethics during World War II, and actually here in California and across the country involving culturally and ethnically diverse communities, including people with disabilities. Interesting. So there could be a case made the kids might need to know about scientific methodologies that are considered ethical violations, at least according to the Department of Health and Human Services. So preliminary findings, and these I say are preliminary because there are a lot of limitations to this study. There's little or no emphasis on moral ethical competence in most of the content standards. Questions remain about the extent to which health education is even taught in schools in the state of California. It is not assessed on the California high school exit exam. It is not included as a domain that's evaluated for kids that exit school. So few values were explicitly stated in the content standards, and but there were a few that were identified. And it appeared to me that moral competence or moral development or ethical development, if you want to use Kohlberg's model, if you want to use any other model that's in the literature, are not included as a focus in every standard or domain and probably receive very limited attention in the content standards in education. Thus, the problem of expecting teachers to teach to that content or to teach to the idea of moral development. And in fact, quite possibly there could be a disincentive for teachers to engage in that kind of instruction. There are a lot of limitations to this study. And one is a deeper analysis needs to be conducted to determine if terms other than those included in the list imply or are, if you will, are code words for a value orientation or moral or ethical orientation, such as collaborate, cooperate, communicate, things of those nature that I might need to expand that list. Two is that single terms may not be an appropriate unit of analysis when you run a content analysis. I've done a content analysis in the past, and there are very specific research strategies for implementing content analyses. Krippendorf in particular has written a number of texts involving detailed content analysis. And I'm published with at least one content analysis, for example, that was published in the journal Multicultural Education, in which I evaluated the extent to which the voices of individuals with disabilities were included in discussions about the disability experience in introductory textbooks of special education and or multicultural education. I selected 10 of those textbooks, reviewed 5,400 plus pages, and found 3 pages out of 5,400 pages having any reference to things like deaf culture, disability culture, or representation of the disability experience from the perspective of people with those experiences. 3 pages out of 5,400 plus. The multicultural education textbooks only looked at the chapters that address, if you will, disability as a cultural experience. I found 6 pages in the multicultural education textbooks. So I'm sharing that with you, and then there's some reliability checks that need to be done as well. Some key terms appear multiple times on the same page, so I don't think number of pages is really a good measure as well. So I'm looking at different ways of doing a deeper analysis and deeper measurement of looking at the extent to which we really do have measures or indicators or benchmarks of the extent to which the, if you will, the moral development of kids is actually addressed in schools. So what evidence is there? And because I'm a faculty member of the Institute for Sathya Sai Education, and which is incorporated as a 501c3 institute here in the state of California, but it's a national and international organization. One of the questions I've asked myself is, what evidence is there in the research literature that values, either explicit or implied, have been examined in the literature, and is there a model or approach that's supported by the evidence? I would suggest that the model of the Institute for Sathya Sai Education is one of those, but let me present the data from a literature review that has not received a very wide attention. And this particular literature review was reported in the New York Association of Colleges for Teacher Education. And the title of it is, "What are the critical characteristics and performance of pre-service candidates related to improving preschool through 12th grade student achievement?" Now, one of the problems, the limitations I'm going to tell you about right now is I work with a population of teachers who are working with populations of students who may not acquire certain levels of performance and achievement. And as a function of that, of those levels of achievement, their humanity is drawn into question. Their worth and value as human beings is questioned. So I believe educators that work with kids with disabilities, as well as in the general education problem, have some very serious, have a very serious responsibility to be able to, as Robert Greenleaf, who was the founder of the Center for Applied Ethics at MIT, said, the responsibility to examine the assumptions by which we operate. I think that's a logical and rational responsibility. This literature review examined 41 studies in 2 areas, knowledge and skills, and that was broken down in terms of content, content knowledge. That is, what does a teacher actually know about the discipline that they're teaching in, such as history, science, biology, math, physics, reading, etc. And then pedagogical content, and that was evaluated in terms of teacher certification, whether or not they took courses in teaching strategies or pedagogy. The authors referred to it as value-added education courses. And then the second area was dispositions and competence. And that was broken down into 2 areas, personal competencies, including self-awareness, self-management, and then social competencies, which included social awareness and relationship management. And here are some of the brief findings. One is teacher certification. There was no relationship between teacher certification and student achievement. In short, you really don't have to be a credentialed teacher to be taught how to teach well or to teach well. And that, I know, goes against the grain. Now, this will fall out in the next one, because what was found was that there was a strong positive correlation between education courses and pedagogy courses taken by teachers and student achievement. So it seems a little bit counterintuitive, but the reason I bring it up is because in the Institute for Sathya Sai Education, we have a highly diverse population of participants who are engineers, who are parents, who are healthcare practitioners, who are probation officers, who are community leaders and activists, who are environmental technicians. And they are working with kids on a lot of different levels, with the idea being that anyone really can do this if they are taught the strategies and given the tools and the skills needed to do it. The issue in our institute is allowing both the teacher and the student to be able to allow it to emerge in their own way, as opposed to structuring it. We give some basic tools and basic guidelines. But coursework in pedagogy was found to be a stronger predictor of teacher effectiveness than general knowledge, though it was, each was found to contribute to student achievement. And interestingly, there was no available studies that link a teacher's technological, pedagogical content knowledge to student achievement. That is, technology such as computer technology or expertise using the internet, etc. Now, no studies means that no conclusions or findings can be drawn. Be really, when you hear something like that, you can't. We got one of the problems that I keep hearing across faculty in my department, et cetera, is the assumption is that if it's not an evidence-based practice, you wouldn't be doing it. Well, if we waited for evidence-based practice to appear before we made a decision operating on kids, I guarantee you it would significantly limit the ability of teachers to work with kids. Some of you are parents in the room. How many of you waited to read the literature on the strategy that you're using before you actually implement it with your kids? Crossing the street, for example, doesn't need a whole, you don't need to know that force is equal to mass times acceleration and that 2 objects cannot occupy the same space at the same time to know that your child probably should wait before a car goes down, before they cross the street. You catch my drift. Sorry. Okay, so the other area that these authors looked at was teacher dispositions. And specifically, they looked at in this case, a number of areas, self-efficacy. Now, in this particular case, self-efficacy was defined in the way that Bandura defined it, and there's a lot of research supporting the implementation of self-efficacy practices. All of the studies that the authors reviewed, in this case it was 5, reported significantly positive correlations between teacher self-efficacy and academic achievement. This self-efficacy or beliefs determine how people feel, think, and motivate themselves, setting goals, achieving those goals, planning on those goals. The more recent literature has addressed the notion of what's referred to as causal agency. Self-efficacy, interestingly enough, has come down to, has been not translated, has been looked at in the context of instruction for kids with disabilities. It's now referred to as self-determination. And Michael Waymeyer and his colleagues at the University of Kansas have done a tremendous amount of work and some experimental studies that have demonstrated a causal relationship between higher levels of self-efficacy and really good post-school outcomes. That is, achieving, getting a job, having good wages, operating in the community independently, things of that nature. High teacher self-efficacy is also known to increase motivation, student motivation, classroom management, job satisfaction, and it also promotes a positive collective school self-efficacy. That is school unity. So the goals and activities that in the context of Satyasai education are driven by what one values. Teacher self-management has also been examined, and this involves what you believe about a child matters in a profound way. And this is something that is fundamental to the implementation of Satyasai education. And a word that was coined by Hoy Tarter and Hoy was academic optimism. These are teachers who steadfastly possess positive beliefs about themselves, their kids, the kids' parents, and in teaching. And so these guys reported gains in student achievement that exhibited a high level of collective efficacy, trust, and optimism. They found an increase in academic optimism directly related to 21% of the variance in math and science achievement and 27% of the variance in reading, writing, and social studies data. So fundamental to us is that we have 5 human values that are inherent. It's a belief system that all children are good, that all children can succeed, that the notion of moral education should not be feared or avoided, but rather encouraged, and that that having that belief in the fundamental goodness of a child will actually improve performance. This involves the review of studies dealing with social awareness and the relationship between social awareness and student achievement. Conclusions are mixed. They only had 2 studies, or excuse me, 3 studies, but 1 out of 2 studies relating to professional commitment indicated a positive correlation between commitment and student achievement, but there was a positive correlation between organizational commitment and student achievement. So interestingly, studies attributed correlation to a combination of strong teacher-student, teacher administration, teacher-parent, school community relationships. Part of the limitation with this particular reporting is how they defined, if you will, social awareness. And it was taken from a model from business, a more, if you will, a model that deals with social awareness coming out of the psychological literature might have been more appropriate in the conduct of that particular, in the selection of those studies for this review. But nonetheless, in terms of relationship management deals with inspirational leadership and influence, development of others, encouragement of others, conflict management, and collaboration. It was addressed in 2 areas: developing student self-efficacy. There were 5 studies. Teacher ratings were significant predictors of SAT results. Teachers who, and this is what was really interesting, the more teachers overestimate student abilities in kindergarten, the higher their overall high school performance would be. And we're able to attribute teacher beliefs and expectations to such performance results. Most of you know the literature by Rosenthal and Jacobson on expectations and the very strong relationship between high expectations, high performance, etc. I'm not going to get into all of that. The remaining 4 studies were conclusive in their findings that a teacher's belief in his or her students' abilities had a significant causal relationship on students' academic achievement. And then they added to this research that teacher expectations early in the year have a direct and lasting effect in predicting student perceived ability later in the year. They also looked at developing teacher-student relationships on student achievement. And teacher-student relationships are evidence. There's many studies that have looked at dozens of dispositions in terms of teacher-student relationships. But overwhelmingly, of the 8 studies that were included in this review, all of the studies indicated a positive relationship between the quality of student-positive relationship with the teacher and his or her overall academic ability. In other words, one of the concerns I initiated in the beginning of the presentation was transplanting the teacher with practice. And that gets at the fundamental instrumentalism. We have instrumental processes that are yielding instrumental outcomes, not good kids. And so what we're seeing is that a strong relationship with a teacher was found to be a significant predictor of student success. There are other studies in the resilience research that have really demonstrated that the single strongest predictor of those kids in challenging environments that continue to succeed despite those challenges is a caring adult. That was the single strongest predictor, that they could go to that adult. And that study, I don't recall the authors, I was looking for it, but that study was actually replicated in 3 high urban areas: Los Angeles, Chicago, and St. Louis. So what's this all mean? Well, from our standpoint with the Institute, we have designed an institute where we have 2 courses that focus in on, and I'm not going to get into this information, 5 human values: truth, love, ethical moral conduct, peace, and nonviolence. That's it. That's the entire focus of our curriculum. You won't see this in the literature. We don't have any evidence to support the efficacy of the program. We just started. We're 3 years. We're into about, we have 60 individuals who will have completed it by the end of June, courses 1 and 2, and then their final diploma course requirements. And we fundamentally believe that these 5 human values are inherent within the child, within everyone. That you don't need to teach them. We need to figure out ways to draw it out, to make it happen, for them to recognize it, for them to see it in themselves. And so we teach many different types of activities. When you look at this, there are a lot of other sub-values associated with this that you could teach. One example of a lesson plan that was developed by one of the participants last year was, and she's an attorney for, she was an attorney for an agency that is involved in environmental monitoring. And she's very concerned about global warming, the effects of, for example, different issues associated with the distribution of garbage around and whether or not it's disposable. And there was, and somebody can help me out, but in the Pacific Ocean there's an area where there's like a 5-mile distribution of garbage that just hangs in there. It's, I don't know, it's almost the size of the United States in terms of square miles, and it's like 5 miles deep, and it's a killer for a lot of the animal life in there. And so she designed a lesson plan addressing sub-values associated with these 5 values around that, and it was a science project. So the idea being developing sensitivity and understanding that violence can be conducted to the planet and in different ways. Are we potentially showing, maybe passing on kids to values that we believe in? Yes, I kind of believe we are. I believe that's the responsibility of adults, and I think through social cohesion in education, that's a fundamental element of the social cohesion, and education is an instrument of social cohesion and unity. So those are some things that have been done. I'm going to end on these because I don't want to emphasize. I will tell you the accomplishments today. We've got our primary emphasis is on living what we learn in the Institute. We're in the 3rd year of exposure, and as I said, we have about 30 who have completed course 1 and about 30 who have completed course 2. Representation across the U.S., highly culturally diverse group of individuals. It includes anyone from all kinds of professions. We currently are working with partnership programs, including a Montessori school in Austin, community programs in St. Louis, at-risk youth in community centers, Kenai program here in San Diego, which is a restorative justice program. After-school programs, there's a teacher who retired from San Diego Unified School District who is now has developed an after-school program, and we have individuals working in developing prison programs, or working in prisons, providing different types of programs. How folks do this is up to them. The reality is it has to be audience specific, it has to be the 5 human values specific, and we employ, if you will, a pedagogy where, and I'm backing up here, with 5 teaching techniques: personal and reflective inquiry, storytelling. The power of storytelling has become, both for children and adults, was highlighted by the Howard Gardner. Most of you know Howard Gardner as the author of Multiple Intelligence, and he wrote another book called Leading Minds, and in that he talked about how the message of an individual is their life. It's the story of their life, and it was a very interesting take on that. We integrate visual and performing arts across disciplines and in curricular areas, and it's experiential instruction using cooperative learning models across disciplines and curricular areas. Again, culturally sensitive to the audience and the needs of the audience. So, having said that, I'm going to stop and just show you that. I don't know if the director is Dr. Hyman Johnson, no relation, obviously. And I would ask you to think about this as you proceed forward in your conversations. And I just got this interestingly sent to me. I teach a course with another colleague of mine from another department, and we're really engaged in cross-disciplinary collaboration and leadership and how we can get people talking to each other and changing systems. Ask a child what's in their heart, and you'll likely hear a combination of facts, feelings, and fantasy. Ask an adult, and you'll likely hear what they know or think. Let us restore ourselves by learning from the children, and let's not be complicated in leading educational systems where children lose heart. Let's instead lead systems where the hearts of the children, their clarity and confidence, and simple goodness lead us. Then we will always remember whom and what we serve. So that's my spiel. I'm not I'm not as immersed in the literature on philosophy, so I have to defer to my colleagues here at the table in that kind of conversation.